There are some celebrity interviews that feel rehearsed from beginning to end. The questions are predictable. The answers are polished. Everyone knows exactly what to say. And then there are interviews with Tom Holland and Zendaya. With these two, even the simplest question can turn into an argument, a joke, an embarrassing confession, or a completely unexpected moment that nobody saw coming. 1 second, they're talking about Spider-Man. The next second, they're arguing about how to pronounce the word croissant. And somehow, that tiny disagreement tells you almost everything about their relationship. Tom says it one way. Zendaya immediately disagrees. Tom tries to defend himself. Zendaya insists that he's wrong. And before long, they're laughing about the fact that Tom is apparently trying way too hard to sound French. It's hilarious, but it's also a perfect example of what makes their chemistry so entertaining. Tom Holland and Zendaya have spent years portraying one of Hollywood's most recognizable young couples on screen. As Peter Parker and MJ, they've gone through danger, heartbreak, awkward teenage moments, and some of the biggest events in the Marvel Universe. But when the cameras aren't rolling on a Spider-Man set, their relationship becomes something completely different. They're playful. They're competitive. They tease each other. They finish each other's thoughts. And sometimes, they simply cannot stop laughing. That's what makes their interviews so memorable. You don't just get two actors promoting a movie. You get two people who clearly know each other's personalities extremely well. And the deeper you look into their funniest moments, the more obvious it becomes that their chemistry isn't limited to the characters they play. It starts with something incredibly simple, Tom's habit of accidentally saying things that become instantly funny. Even Zendaya seems to know that if Tom is given enough time to answer a question, there's a good chance he'll eventually say something completely ridiculous. Take the endless problem of spoilers. Tom has developed something of a reputation for being terrible at keeping movie secrets. Marvel fans know the story. Ask Tom Holland about an upcoming Spider-Man movie, and there is always a possibility that he will reveal more than he was supposed to. Sometimes it's an accidental spoiler. Sometimes it's a suspiciously specific answer. And sometimes, it feels like Zendaya has to step in and save him from himself. That's part of their dynamic. Zendaya seems to understand exactly how Tom's mind works. She knows when he's about to say too much. She knows when he's trying to sound clever. And she definitely knows when he's about to turn a normal interview question into a joke. One of the funniest examples comes when Tom is asked how likely he is to return as Spider-Man. The obvious answer would be a number between 1 and 10. Simple. Safe. Easy. But Tom Holland doesn't give a normal answer. Instead, he says, pie. For a moment, Zendaya doesn't even understand what he's talking about. Pie. Tom tries to explain. He's attempting to suggest that the answer is complicated because there are an infinite number of possibilities. In his mind, he's being incredibly clever. Zendaya, however, has another interpretation. She starts thinking about actual pie. Apple pie. And suddenly, what was supposed to sound like an intelligent mathematical answer becomes a completely ridiculous conversation about dessert. Tom eventually admits that he thought he was being clever. He wasn't. He was basically just talking about pie. And Zendaya absolutely loves the opportunity to make fun of him for it. But then the conversation reveals something even more interesting. Zendaya explains that Tom used to do something similar at dinner parties. She would make a joke. Nobody would hear it. Then Tom would repeat the exact same joke. Suddenly everyone would laugh. And Tom would act as if the joke had been his all along. That is the kind of story only someone who knows you extremely well can tell. It's not the kind of thing a casual co-star would remember. It's the kind of detail you know because you've spent years around someone. And Tom's reaction makes it even funnier because he doesn't really deny it. Instead, he basically accepts that he has been stealing Zendaya's jokes for years. Their relationship has always had that playful competitiveness. Neither one seems desperate to win every argument. They just enjoy making each other laugh. And sometimes that means taking a perfectly normal conversation and completely destroying it with one ridiculous comment. That same energy appears whenever they talk about their work together. On screen, Peter Parker and MJ have a complicated relationship. But behind the scenes, Tom and Zendaya seem much more comfortable simply making fun of each other. For example, they have talked about filming scenes where their characters have to look serious, heroic, or romantic. But Tom knows exactly how ridiculous it can feel to actually perform those poses. Especially when you're wearing the Spider-Man suit. Zendaya jokes about how Tom looks heroic on camera. Tom explains that the mask makes everything easier. When you're wearing the Spider-Man mask, you can hide the fact that you're concentrating on holding an awkward pose. But when the mask comes off, suddenly you're standing there thinking, I have to look heroic right now. And that becomes another opportunity for them to laugh. Because being a superhero doesn't always feel as glamorous as it looks. Tom has also joked about getting older and losing some of the acrobatic abilities he had when he first became Spider-Man. He remembers being younger during the earlier movies and performing stunts with much more confidence. Now, he jokes that he's getting old. Zendaya remembers him complaining about his stunts even back then. He would perform something physically difficult and immediately say it looked terrible. That's another thing that makes their interviews so entertaining. Zendaya doesn't simply listen to Tom's stories. She remembers them. She remembers how he behaved on set. She remembers the little comments he made. And she isn't afraid to bring those memories back when the opportunity appears. Behind the superhero image, there's a very human relationship. And that becomes even clearer when they talk about the people surrounding Peter Parker. Spider-Man may be the hero, but Tom and Zendaya understand that Peter couldn't succeed without the people closest to him. Aunt May, MJ, Ned, Happy. Each person plays an important role in Peter's journey. And the conversation eventually moves into real life. Tom makes an interesting point: sometimes you have to look at the people around you. Your circle matters. The people you spend time with can influence who you become. Zendaya agrees. They joke about how sometimes you look at someone's friends and immediately think, you need better people around you. It's funny, but there's also a serious message underneath it. Success isn't just about what you can accomplish alone. It's also about who supports you when things become difficult. And Tom seems to understand that more than most. Zendaya describes him as relentlessly optimistic. No matter how difficult the day has been, Tom has a habit of looking toward tomorrow. He believes that things can get better. He believes that problems can be solved. And he seems determined to find something positive even when everyone else is exhausted. Zendaya remembers him saying things like, tomorrow is a brand new day. The funny part is that sometimes Tom says it way too early. It could be 11 o'clock in the morning. The day isn't even close to being finished. And Tom is already ready to go to bed because, apparently, tomorrow will be better. Zendaya laughs about this because she knows exactly how predictable he can be. But she also admits that his positivity is genuine. Tom isn't simply pretending to be optimistic. That's part of his personality. And according to Zendaya, even when he's having a difficult day, he eventually finds a way to move forward. She also points out that she's generally optimistic herself. But there are moments when she can focus on the negative. Tom, on the other hand, often tries to pull the conversation back toward the positive. That difference creates another interesting part of their dynamic. They're not identical. They don't think exactly the same way. But they balance each other. And perhaps that's one reason their friendship and on-screen chemistry work so well. Then there's the strange experience of growing up together on a Spider-Man set. They've talked about the fake school environment created for the movies. For young actors, being placed into that environment could have been incredibly unusual. They were filming massive superhero movies, but at the same time, they were pretending to be ordinary teenagers going to school. Zendaya remembers those days fondly. Tom does too. They describe that period as one of the most fun summers they had. There was something special about the early Spider-Man experience. They were young. The movies were becoming enormous. And yet, behind the scenes, they were still a group of people joking around and trying to figure everything out. That's part of what makes their memories so valuable. The audience sees the finished movie. They see the polished scenes, the action, the visual effects, the emotional moments. But Tom and Zendaya remember what happened between takes. They remember the jokes, the mistakes, the awkward moments, and the ridiculous situations that never made it into the final film. One of the biggest challenges they faced was explaining Spider-Man's story without accidentally revealing the movie. This is especially difficult when Tom Holland is involved. Because Tom has always had a complicated relationship with spoilers. Zendaya knows this. The interviewer knows this. The audience knows this. And Tom probably knows it too. During one explanation, Tom begins talking about Peter Parker's situation. He starts explaining that Mysterio has revealed Spider-Man's identity to the world. But even before he finishes, Zendaya notices that Tom is struggling to explain the story properly. She corrects him. She helps him find the right word. And once again, the interview turns into a comedy routine. This happens repeatedly. Tom starts explaining. Zendaya jumps in. Tom tries to continue. Zendaya corrects him. And eventually, they both start laughing. It's almost like watching two friends trying to tell the same story at the same time. But underneath the comedy is something important. They know the characters extremely well. They understand Peter and MJ. They understand their history. They understand what motivates them. And they've spent years developing that relationship. That's why even a simple interview question about their characters can turn into a long conversation. One of the most interesting things they discuss is Peter and MJ's relationship. Tom describes some of their scenes as an acting exercise. They experimented with different versions of their relationship. They even explored what it would be like for Peter and MJ to act as if they had never met. It's a strange concept considering how much history the characters have. But for actors, those exercises can help them understand their characters from a different perspective. Zendaya reacts to Tom's explanation with confusion and laughter. Again, it's a perfect example of how they interact. Tom tries to explain something seriously. Zendaya questions him. And suddenly the entire conversation becomes funny. Their chemistry doesn't depend on scripted jokes. It happens naturally. The same thing occurs when they talk about working with Robert Pattinson. Both Tom and Zendaya have worked with him on different projects. When asked what it's like to work with him, Tom gives an answer that perfectly matches the personality they've described throughout the interview. He calls Pattinson an agent of chaos. Zendaya agrees. According to them, working with him can be unpredictable. You never really know what is going to happen next. And apparently, that experience isn't too different from being around Tom himself. That's another recurring theme. Tom seems to bring chaos wherever he goes. But it's a kind of chaos people enjoy. He's energetic. He's spontaneous. He's constantly joking. And he seems to make even stressful situations more entertaining. Zendaya's description of him as relentlessly optimistic fits perfectly into that personality. She says he brings positive energy wherever he goes. When everyone else is tired, Tom is the person saying they can still finish. When the day has been difficult, he's the one reminding everyone that tomorrow is another opportunity. And while Zendaya laughs at how frequently he does this, she clearly appreciates it. Because sometimes, having someone around who refuses to give up can make a huge difference. But their relationship isn't always calm and supportive. Sometimes it's pure chaos. Especially when they're performing stunts. Spider-Man movies are filled with dangerous and complicated action sequences. Tom is used to performing them. Zendaya has also had to become comfortable with stunt work. But their height difference created a surprisingly funny problem. During one stunt, Spider-Man swings MJ onto a bridge. The choreography is supposed to make everything look smooth. Tom is supposed to land after Zendaya and appear completely in control. But because Zendaya is taller, her feet hit the ground first. Tom has to land afterward. And instead of looking like a flawless superhero, his body sometimes ends up moving in a way that is much less heroic. Zendaya describes the situation while laughing. Tom has to explain the technical side of the stunt. There are specific marks used to keep actors safe. They're designed to prevent injuries. But when the stunt is performed, it can still look hilarious from the outside. Zendaya lands. Tom lands afterward. And suddenly the superhero doesn't look quite as invincible as he did a second earlier. It's another example of how the finished movie hides the reality of filmmaking. The audience sees Spider-Man effortlessly swinging through the city. The actors see harnesses, marks, choreography, timing, and sometimes very awkward landings. And then there are the moments when Tom decides to make the situation even more ridiculous. At one point, he pitches an absurd stunt involving an upside-down kissing scene in the rain. The idea is so over the top that everyone starts laughing. Tom is ready to do it. He wants the stunt. He wants the dramatic moment. And suddenly the entire conversation turns into chaos. That is Tom and Zendaya at their best. A normal question becomes a joke. A joke becomes an argument. The argument becomes laughter. And before you know it, nobody is talking about the original question anymore. But perhaps one of the funniest things about Tom is how quickly he can accidentally reveal something he wasn't supposed to reveal. This becomes obvious when he's asked about his reaction to appearing in a Venom-related scene. At first, Tom thinks the interviewer is asking about something else. For a second, it sounds like he's about to discuss a future project. Then he realizes what the question actually means. And immediately, the panic begins. He stops. He laughs. Everyone realizes what just happened. And once again, Tom Holland finds himself dangerously close to saying too much. Zendaya doesn't even need to say much. Her reaction says everything. She knows exactly what just happened. And fans have come to expect these moments from Tom. He may be one of the biggest stars in the world, but when it comes to keeping Marvel secrets, he sometimes seems like the last person the studio would want holding a microphone. And yet, that honesty is also part of what makes him so likable. He doesn't always have a perfectly polished answer. Sometimes he makes mistakes. Sometimes he gets confused. Sometimes he reveals too much. And sometimes he simply says something completely ridiculous. But the result is usually entertaining. That same honesty appears when he talks about everyday life. Take his gift policy. Tom admits that if someone gives him a gift he doesn't like, he might return it. Zendaya immediately thinks that's incredibly mean. Tom disagrees. He argues that some people simply aren't good at choosing gifts. So why keep something you don't want? It's a surprisingly serious debate over something incredibly small. But once again, their personalities come true. Tom approaches the situation practically. Zendaya sees the emotional side. And then Tom almost exposes a family member while explaining his point. He starts talking about someone in his family who apparently gave him something that wasn't very good. Then the conversation turns to cooking. And that's where things get even more personal. Tom describes making lamb shanks. He tried. He put effort into it. But apparently, the result wasn't exactly a masterpiece. He used too much red wine. He overcooked the meat. And eventually, he heard from his brothers that the dish was terrible. Zendaya can't resist laughing. Tom tries to defend himself. But the damage has already been done. And this leads naturally into another hilarious revelation. Tom and Zendaya apparently should not cook together. They both admit it. The problem isn't that either of them completely refuses to cook. The problem is that both of them want to control the kitchen. If Tom is cooking, he wants to do it his way. If Zendaya is cooking, she wants to do it her way. And neither seems particularly interested in taking instructions from the other. Tom also jokes that Zendaya can be dangerous with a knife. He describes her holding an onion in a way that makes him nervous. Zendaya laughs. But she doesn't exactly deny it. Then there's Tom's habit of adding ingredients. He'll say he's only going to add a little paprika. Then suddenly, the entire bottle seems to be going into the food. Because, according to Tom, the food needs flavor. It's one of those small domestic arguments that feels completely different from the glamorous celebrity image people usually see. These are not superhero moments. They're not red carpet moments. They're ordinary, funny, everyday moments. And somehow, those are often the most entertaining. Because behind the fame, the movies, and the cameras, Tom and Zendaya still have the same problems as everyone else. They disagree. They tease each other. They compete. They make mistakes. And sometimes, they just laugh at something completely stupid. That's what makes their dynamic so compelling. But there is still another side of their relationship that fans love. Their ability to surprise each other. And one of the best examples happened when Tom secretly prepared a performance involving Rihanna. Zendaya apparently had no idea what was coming. Then the performance started. Music filled the room. The crowd reacted. Tom began dancing. And Zendaya's reaction was priceless. She watched as Tom completely committed to the performance. It wasn't just a small joke. He went all in. The confidence. The dancing. The energy. Everything came together. And Zendaya couldn't hide her surprise. For someone who spends so much time around Tom, It's impressive that he was able to keep something like that secret. But he did. And that moment became another example of the unpredictable relationship between them. Just when Zendaya thinks she knows exactly what Tom is going to do, he surprises her. And perhaps that's part of the reason their interviews never feel repetitive. You never know what will happen next. One minute they're talking about Spider-Man. The next they're debating food. Then they're discussing relationships. Then they're remembering embarrassing moments from set. And somehow, everything connects back to their natural chemistry. But the funniest moments aren't always the biggest ones. Sometimes they're the smallest. Like when Tom remembers an embarrassing moment from filming. During one Spider-Man press tour, Tom, Zendaya, and Jacob Batalon had to perform a stunt involving scaffolding. The choreography was already complicated. They were positioned close together. They had to jump. They had to spin. And they had to make the entire thing look effortless. But Tom remembers one detail that Zendaya definitely wishes he had forgotten. He farted. Right there during the stunt. On Zendaya's leg. The moment he brings it up, Zendaya immediately remembers. She confirms it. And suddenly another serious Spider-Man memory becomes one of the dumbest stories imaginable. That kind of story tells you something. These actors have spent so much time together that they have accumulated years of memories that have nothing to do with fame. They remember awkward moments. Private jokes. Strange accidents. Long days on set. And ridiculous things that nobody else would understand. That's why their interviews feel less like promotional appearances and more like two friends remembering old stories. And sometimes, they even argue over who was invited to a party. During one Spider-Man shoot, Rihanna's music was playing. Everyone started dancing. There was a full party happening on set. But apparently, Tom wasn't invited. And that was a serious problem. Because Tom was Spider-Man. He jokingly points out that he was literally the star of the movie and somehow still wasn't invited to the dance party. The story is ridiculous. But again, that's the kind of memory that sticks. Not the perfectly choreographed scenes. Not the press conferences. The little moments. The jokes. The unexpected parties. The people dancing between takes. Those are the memories that actors often carry long after a movie is finished. And Tom and Zendaya clearly have plenty of them. But their competitive side is just as entertaining. At one point, the two end up playing air hockey. And suddenly the friendly interview becomes a competition. Tom is determined to win. Zendaya isn't backing down. The score starts moving. Tom gets ahead. The tension builds. And the playful teasing turns into genuine competitive energy. This is another part of their relationship that fans rarely get to see. They can be incredibly supportive of each other. But put them into a competition and suddenly neither wants to lose. That same energy appears when they test each other's Spider-Man knowledge. They've spent years making these movies. They should know the answers. But knowing something during a normal conversation is very different from remembering it when someone is putting you on the spot. The questions begin. Some answers come quickly. Others become complete disasters. They are asked about MJ's full name. They discuss Michelle Jones Watson. They remember details from previous movies. Then they move into deeper Spider-Man trivia. What was Peter Parker's first word in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Which other actor from another popular series appeared in Spider-Man: Homecoming? Suddenly, both of them are trying to beat each other. And whenever one person gives the other a hint, accusations immediately follow. You gave her the answer. The competition becomes almost as entertaining as the questions themselves. Then they reach one of the most emotional moments in Peter Parker's entire story. Peter's final words to Tony Stark. Tom knows the scene. Zendaya knows the scene. But now they're trying to remember the exact wording. They begin debating the line. I don't want to go. I'm sorry. Which one counts? Which one was the final line? They start arguing over it. Eventually, they compromise and split the points. Half a point for one answer. Half a point for the other. And somehow, even a heartbreaking Spider-Man moment becomes another opportunity for them to tease each other. That's the pattern throughout their relationship. They can talk about serious subjects. They can talk about difficult scenes. They can talk about emotional moments. But sooner or later, one of them finds a way to make the other laugh. And perhaps that is what makes their connection so memorable. Because behind the superhero costumes, the enormous movie premieres, the fame, and the constant attention, their relationship is built around something much simpler. Comfort. They are comfortable enough to disagree. Comfortable enough to embarrass each other. Comfortable enough to admit when they are wrong. Comfortable enough to bring up old stories that probably should have stayed buried. And comfortable enough to laugh when things go completely off track. Tom Holland may play one of the world's most famous superheroes. Zendaya may play the person closest to him in that story. But when they're sitting next to each other in an interview, they don't feel like Peter Parker and MJ. They feel like Tom and Zendaya. And that's exactly why fans keep watching. Because the most entertaining moments aren't necessarily the ones that were planned. They're the moments when Tom says something ridiculous. When Zendaya catches him. When they start laughing. When an old memory suddenly comes back. When a serious question turns into an argument about pie, cooking, dancing, spoilers, or even the correct pronunciation of a croissant. And if part 1 has shown us anything, it's that their funniest moments often happen when neither of them is trying to be funny. But there is still much more to their story. Because the deeper you go into their interviews, the more unbelievable the behind-the-scenes moments become. From secret performances to chaotic stunts, from embarrassing memories to fierce competitions, Tom and Zendaya have created years of moments that fans simply can't forget. And the next part reveals even more of the hilarious, unexpected, and completely chaotic moments that show why their chemistry continues to stand out. If part 1 proved anything, it is that Tom Holland and Zendaya don't need a script to create entertaining moments. Give them a microphone, put them next to each other, and eventually something unexpected is going to happen. Maybe Tom will reveal something he wasn't supposed to. Maybe Zendaya will catch him exaggerating. Maybe they'll start arguing over food. Or maybe they'll simply remember one ridiculous moment from years ago and spend the next few minutes laughing about it. That natural chemistry is what makes their interviews so enjoyable. But there's another reason their interactions stand out. They've grown together through one of the biggest movie franchises in history. When Tom first stepped into the role of Peter Parker, he was still very young. The Spider-Man movies became a huge part of his career. And Zendaya became an equally important part of that journey as MJ. Over time, the two weren't just learning how to play their characters. They were learning how to work together. They were learning each other's rhythms. They learned when the other person was joking. They learned when the other person was nervous. They learned when to step in and help. And most importantly, they learned how to make each other laugh. That last part may sound simple, but it is incredibly important. Long movie productions can be exhausting. There are early mornings, long nights, repeated takes, stunt rehearsals, press tours, interviews, travel. And sometimes, after months of working, the only thing that keeps a difficult day enjoyable is having someone around who can make you laugh. For Tom and Zendaya, that person often seems to be each other. One of the clearest examples is the way Zendaya describes Tom's attitude toward difficult situations. She says he has an almost automatic ability to find the positive side of things. If something goes wrong, Tom's response is often, "We can do this." If the day is terrible, he'll remind everyone that tomorrow is another day. If something feels impossible, he'll try to convince everyone that they'll figure it out. Zendaya finds it funny because sometimes Tom's optimism appears at completely ridiculous times. He might be ready to give up on the current day before lunch. But at the same time, she clearly admires that quality. Because optimism isn't always about pretending everything is perfect. Sometimes it's simply about refusing to believe that one bad moment defines the entire story. And that's something that seems to connect Tom's personality to the character he plays. Peter Parker gets knocked down constantly. He loses people. He makes mistakes. He faces enemies who are stronger than him. He has moments where everything seems to collapse. Yet Peter keeps getting back up. Tom's personality isn't identical to Peter's, of course, but the positive energy Zendaya describes helps explain why he was such a natural fit for the role. He brings enthusiasm to the character. He brings humor. And he brings a sense of vulnerability that makes Peter feel human. Zendaya understands that better than almost anyone. She has watched him perform Spider-Man's most physically demanding scenes. She has watched him prepare for stunts. She has watched him rehearse emotional scenes. And she has watched him completely change his personality when the cameras start rolling. But she has also seen the person underneath the costume. And that contrast is fascinating. On screen, Tom has to convince millions of people that he's a superhero. Off-screen, he's the guy arguing about paprika. He's the guy who doesn't know when to stop joking. He's the guy who accidentally reveals spoilers. He's the guy who thinks saying pie is an intelligent answer to a simple question. That contrast makes the character feel even more relatable. But Tom isn't the only one who gets teased. Zendaya has her moments too. One of the funniest examples comes from their cooking stories. Both of them admit that working together in the kitchen is probably not a good idea. Not because they can't cook, but because they are both too controlling. If Tom is preparing a meal, he wants to do it his way. If Zendaya is cooking, she wants to do it her way. And apparently, neither person is particularly interested in stepping aside. Tom jokes that Zendaya gets dangerously close to cutting herself when she's preparing vegetables. She holds an onion. She grabs the knife. And Tom is already worried. Then Tom reveals his own problem. He doesn't know the meaning of the word a little. He says he'll add a little paprika. Then suddenly there's a lot of paprika. He wants flavor. Zendaya watches this happen and probably realizes that the kitchen is safer when only one of them is in charge. It's a tiny story, but it's exactly the kind of detail fans love. Because celebrity interviews usually focus on huge subjects. Movies. Careers. Awards. Fame. But the stories people remember are often much smaller. Who cooks? Who is messy? Who steals jokes? Who gets competitive? Who can't keep a secret? Who is more likely to panic? These details make celebrities feel human. And Tom and Zendaya seem unusually willing to share them. Another example is Tom's approach to gifts. He admits that if someone gives him a gift he doesn't like, he might return it. Zendaya immediately objects. She thinks that's too harsh. Tom sees it differently. His argument is simple. If the gift isn't useful or enjoyable, why keep it? But Zendaya isn't convinced. She believes the thought behind the gift matters. And once again, they find themselves on opposite sides of a completely ordinary argument. That's what makes their conversations so funny. Neither person is discussing anything particularly important. But both are passionate enough to defend their position. Tom is practical. Zendaya is more sentimental. And instead of becoming a serious disagreement, it turns into playful teasing. Then Tom almost reveals the identity of a family member. He starts telling a story about someone who tried to cook for him. The food looked good. But apparently, it didn't taste very good. Tom explains what went wrong with the lamb. Too much red wine. Overcooked meat. Too much sauce. And somehow, he still seems proud that he tried. That is another characteristic of Tom. He is willing to embarrass himself. He doesn't seem desperate to maintain a perfect celebrity image. If something funny happened, he'll tell the story. Even if the story makes him look ridiculous. That's why his interviews can feel spontaneous. He's not afraid to laugh at himself. And Zendaya clearly enjoys that. She doesn't protect him from every embarrassing story. Sometimes she makes it worse. But the same thing goes both ways. Tom remembers Zendaya's awkward moments too. And when he brings them up, she knows exactly what he's talking about. Their shared history gives them an enormous amount of material. Years of filming mean years of memories. Some are beautiful. Some are emotional. And some are completely ridiculous. Like the infamous stunt involving Tom, Zendaya, and Jacob Batalon. The three had to perform a complicated movement involving scaffolding. They were positioned together. They had to jump. They had to spin. And they had to make everything look natural. But then Tom remembers the most embarrassing detail possible. He farted. On Zendaya's leg. The second he says it, Zendaya remembers. She confirms it. And suddenly everyone is laughing. It's impossible to plan a moment like that. It isn't part of the movie. It isn't part of the official story. It's simply one of those strange memories that happens when people spend years together. And those are the moments that often create the strongest bonds. You don't remember every normal day. You remember the day something completely ridiculous happened. You remember the mistake everyone laughed about. You remember the joke that nobody else understood. And Tom and Zendaya have clearly collected hundreds of those memories. Some of them happened during filming. Others happened during press tours. And some happened when they were simply hanging around between takes. One story involves a dance party on set. Rihanna's music was playing. Everyone started dancing. The atmosphere became more like a party than a movie set. But Tom apparently wasn't invited. And he was offended. Not because he desperately wanted to dance. But because he was Spider-Man. He was one of the main stars of the movie. And somehow, everyone was having a dance party without him. He jokingly complains that he was excluded. The story is funny because it perfectly captures the difference between the massive movie Tom was starring in and the ordinary atmosphere behind the scenes. The audience sees a huge Hollywood production. The cast sees a workplace. And sometimes that workplace turns into a dance party. That same competitive energy appears when Tom and Zendaya play games. One of the funniest examples is air hockey. At first, it seems harmless. Then the competition begins. Tom starts scoring. Zendaya tries to catch up. Everyone gets excited. The score changes. Suddenly, nobody is thinking about the interview anymore. They're focused on winning. Tom's competitive side becomes obvious. Zendaya isn't exactly passive either. She wants to win. And when two people who know each other this well compete, the teasing becomes even better. They know exactly which buttons to push. They know how to distract each other. They know how to celebrate a victory. And they definitely know how to complain about losing. It's not difficult to imagine that this same competitive energy exists away from the cameras. Whether it's games, sports, cooking, or even arguments over pronunciation, neither seems particularly willing to surrender. But the most impressive thing is that they can compete without making the atmosphere uncomfortable. They can argue and laugh at the same time. That's an important difference. Their disagreements never seem to destroy the fun. Instead, they become part of the fun. And then there are the Spider-Man trivia games. After years of making these movies, you'd think Tom and Zendaya would know every detail. But pressure changes everything. A question that seems easy suddenly becomes difficult when someone is waiting for an immediate answer. They are asked about MJ's full name. Michelle Jones Watson. They remember the detail, but then they start talking about scenes that didn't make the final movie. Apparently, there was a storyline involving MJ's surname that was filmed or discussed but ultimately didn't make it into the final cut. There was simply too much story to fit into the movie. And that is one of the realities of filmmaking. Actors can spend months preparing scenes that audiences never see. Entire conversations can disappear during editing. Characters can have backstories that never make it onto the screen. And Tom and Zendaya remember many of those details. That's why their memories of Spider-Man are so much bigger than the final movies. They remember what was filmed. What was cut. What changed. What was improvised. And what almost happened. But they have to be careful. Because Marvel fans are always listening. One wrong sentence can become a headline. One accidental detail can become a theory. One innocent joke can become a spoiler. And Tom knows this better than almost anyone. That's why Zendaya sometimes acts like his safety system. When Tom gets too close to revealing something, she steps in. When he starts explaining too much, she redirects him. And when he says something confusing, she tries to figure out what he means. Their communication during interviews often feels like a private language. One person starts a thought. The other person immediately understands where it's going. Sometimes Zendaya finishes Tom's explanation. Sometimes Tom remembers something Zendaya forgot. Sometimes they both start talking at the same time. And sometimes they simply look at each other and laugh. That kind of chemistry can't easily be manufactured. It comes from familiarity. They've spent years around each other. They've experienced major career moments together. They've traveled together for press tours. They've filmed emotional scenes. They've performed stunts. They've watched each other grow. And naturally, that history shows. One of the most interesting things about their relationship is how comfortable they are discussing their characters. Peter and MJ aren't just a typical movie couple. Their relationship develops over several films. They experience uncertainty. They experience loss. They experience separation. And they repeatedly have to choose whether to trust each other. Tom and Zendaya have talked about how their characters changed over time. Early on, Peter and MJ were awkward teenagers. Their relationship was full of nervous energy. They didn't always know what to say. But as the movies progressed, the relationship became more serious. The characters grew up. The stakes became higher. And eventually, their relationship became one of the emotional centers of the Spider-Man story. Tom and Zendaya had to grow alongside those characters. And that is something audiences can see. Their performances became more confident. Their scenes became more natural. Their timing improved. And their chemistry became one of the most talked about parts of the franchise. But behind the scenes, the two still seemed determined not to take themselves too seriously. That's important. Because superhero movies can become enormous. The expectations can be overwhelming. Millions of people watch. Every detail is analyzed. Every interview becomes part of the promotional machine. And yet Tom and Zendaya frequently break through that seriousness with humor. They make mistakes. They laugh. They interrupt each other. They tell embarrassing stories. And they remind everyone that underneath the movie stars are two normal people having fun. Tom's humor is often self-deprecating. He'll make himself look silly before someone else gets the chance. He'll admit when he doesn't know something. He'll acknowledge when he's made a mistake. And he'll happily tell a story that makes him look ridiculous. That quality makes him extremely likable. Zendaya's humor is different. She often reacts. She watches. She waits. And then she delivers a comment at exactly the right moment. She doesn't always need to be the loudest person in the conversation. Sometimes one expression is enough. Sometimes a single sentence completely destroys Tom's argument. And Tom knows it. That's why their interviews often feel like a comedy duo. One creates the setup. The other delivers the reaction. Then they switch roles. The result is unpredictable. And perhaps that's why fans continue returning to these clips years later. People aren't only watching for Spider-Man information. They're watching because they enjoy seeing Tom and Zendaya interact. They're curious about what joke will happen next. They're curious about what memory they'll reveal. They're curious about which one will win the next argument. And sometimes they're simply waiting for Tom to accidentally say something he shouldn't. That last one has become almost a tradition. Tom has repeatedly shown that he is not the most reliable person when it comes to secrets. And yet, he somehow remains one of Marvel's most beloved stars. Maybe that's because his mistakes feel genuine. He's not trying to spoil anything. He just gets excited. He wants to talk about the movie. He wants to share what he enjoyed. And sometimes his enthusiasm moves faster than his filter. Zendaya seems to understand that. She doesn't treat him like a liability. She treats him like Tom. And that makes their dynamic feel natural. The same is true when they discuss difficult scenes. Peter Parker has gone through some incredibly emotional moments. One of the most painful is his relationship with Tony Stark. Tony becomes a mentor figure for Peter. He teaches him. He challenges him. He worries about him. And eventually, Peter has to experience devastating loss. Tom has described Peter as struggling emotionally after losing Tony. The character isn't simply a superhero anymore. He's a young person trying to understand grief. And that emotional weight becomes part of his journey. Zendaya's MJ also becomes important during those difficult moments. She is one of the people Peter trusts. She isn't just a romantic interest. She's part of his support system. That's why Tom and Zendaya's scenes together carry so much emotional weight. Their relationship isn't simply about romance. It's about trust. It's about friendship. It's about being there when everything else falls apart. And perhaps that's why the comedy behind the scenes is so valuable. After spending hours filming intense emotional scenes, the actors need moments where they can laugh. They need to break the tension. They need to remind themselves that the movie isn't real life. Tom and Zendaya seem particularly good at doing that. One minute they're filming a heartbreaking scene. The next minute they're joking about food. Or dancing. Or playing games. Or remembering an embarrassing stunt. That balance is probably one of the reasons they have remained such an entertaining pair. Even when discussing something serious, they can find a way to make the atmosphere lighter. And even when they're joking, they occasionally reveal something meaningful. For example, Tom's comments about surrounding yourself with good people may have sounded like a casual joke. But the idea is actually important. Success can change your life. Fame can change your relationships. And when you're constantly surrounded by people, it can be difficult to know who genuinely supports you. Tom seems to value his circle. Zendaya does too. Their friendship appears to be built on trust. And trust is especially important when you're working together on something as massive as Spider-Man. Because filming a superhero movie isn't just about acting. It requires vulnerability. You have to trust your co-star during stunts. You have to trust them during emotional scenes. You have to trust them during improvisation. And you have to trust them not to ruin the moment when something goes wrong. Tom and Zendaya seem to have developed that trust over years. That's why they can joke with each other so easily. That's why they can challenge each other. That's why they can tell embarrassing stories without becoming uncomfortable. And that's why their interviews feel different from standard celebrity promotions. There's a history underneath every joke. There's a shared memory behind every laugh. And there's an understanding that comes from years of working together. The funniest part is that neither of them seems particularly interested in pretending to be perfect. Tom can be awkward. Zendaya can tease him. Tom can tease her back. They can disagree. They can get competitive. They can embarrass each other. But the laughter always comes back. And perhaps that's the real reason fans connect with them. Not because they're perfect. But because their interactions feel familiar. Almost everyone knows what it's like to have someone who knows your embarrassing stories. Someone who remembers your old mistakes. Someone who can predict what you're going to say. Someone who can make you laugh when you're tired. Someone who can call you out when you're being ridiculous. Tom and Zendaya seem to have that kind of connection. Whether people watch them as Peter and MJ or simply as Tom and Zendaya, the chemistry is difficult to ignore. From arguing about the pronunciation of a croissant to debating whether gifts should be returned. From cooking disasters to secret dance performances. From Spider-Man spoilers to embarrassing stunts. From air hockey competitions to movie trivia. Their interviews are filled with moments that feel completely spontaneous. And that's what makes them so entertaining. You never really know what you're going to get. Maybe Tom will accidentally reveal a secret. Maybe Zendaya will correct him. Maybe they'll start laughing. Maybe they'll remember something from years ago. And maybe the entire interview will suddenly become a debate about something that has absolutely nothing to do with the original question. But that's the magic. The best moments aren't always planned. Sometimes they're accidents. Sometimes they're mistakes. Sometimes they're stories that were never supposed to become public. And sometimes they're just two people who genuinely enjoy making each other laugh. For Tom Holland and Zendaya, that chemistry has survived years of filming, press tours, massive premieres, and constant attention. Their careers have grown. Their characters have changed. The Spider-Man universe has expanded. But the humor between them has remained. And perhaps that's why these moments continue to resonate with fans. Because underneath the superhero mythology is something much simpler. Friendship. Trust. Comfort. And a shared sense of humor. Tom Holland may spend his career playing a superhero who swings through New York City. Zendaya may spend hers taking on some of Hollywood's biggest roles. But when they're together, the biggest movie in the world sometimes becomes irrelevant. They're just two people laughing about a bad joke. Two people arguing about food. Two people remembering an embarrassing stunt. Two people competing over a game. Two people trying not to spoil a movie. And two people who clearly know exactly how to make each other laugh. That's what makes their behind-the-scenes moments so special. The movies may eventually change. The characters may evolve. New actors may enter the story. New adventures may begin. But the memories created during those years will always remain. The jokes. The mistakes. The dance parties. The stunts. The arguments. The spoilers. The competitions. The ridiculous stories. All of them become part of the history behind one of Hollywood's most recognizable on-screen partnerships. And maybe the funniest thing of all is that none of it feels forced. Tom doesn't have to try too hard to make Zendaya laugh. Zendaya doesn't have to prepare a perfect response. They simply interact. And somehow, that's enough. Because when two people have spent years working together, they develop a rhythm that can't be easily copied. They know when to interrupt. They know when to tease. They know when to be serious. And they know when it's time to stop talking and just laugh. That is the real story behind these moments. Not the Spider-Man suit. Not the special effects. Not the red carpets. Not the headlines. The real story is the human connection underneath all of it. And that's why, years later, fans are still watching these clips. Still laughing at Tom's terrible attempts at pronunciation. Still watching Zendaya catch him before he reveals another spoiler. Still remembering the ridiculous stunt stories. Still enjoying their competitive moments. And still wondering what hilarious moment they'll create next. Because with Tom Holland and Zendaya, one thing is almost guaranteed. You can prepare the questions. You can prepare the cameras. You can prepare the entire interview. But you can never completely prepare for what happens when the two of them start talking. And honestly, that's exactly how it should be. Because sometimes the most memorable moments aren't the ones written in a script. They're the moments that happen naturally. The moments that surprise everyone. The moments that make people laugh. And the moments that remind us that behind every huge Hollywood production are real people creating memories together. For Tom Holland and Zendaya, those memories have produced some of the funniest behind-the-scenes moments fans could ask for. And if their past interviews are anything to go by, there will probably be many more. Because no matter how many movies they make, no matter how many interviews they give, and no matter how many times they try to stay serious, there's always a chance that Tom will say something ridiculous, Zendaya will call him out, and the entire conversation will collapse into laughter. And maybe that's the perfect ending. Not a dramatic superhero moment. Not a carefully prepared statement. Just Tom and Zendaya laughing together. Exactly the way their funniest stories began. And exactly why fans can't seem to get enough of them.